For a closer look now at the Republicans' shifting identity under Donald Trump and what it might mean for American democracy and the world, we are joined by Fiona Hill, a former top official on the National Security Council, and Robert Kagan is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and an editor-at-large for the Washington Post, the author of Rebellion: How Anti-Liberalism is Tearing America Apart Again. Good to have you both here. You're a former Intel analyst, Fiona, and Bob, you're a historian, Republican turned independent. So I want you to help us analyze America like it were a foreign country. Bob, here's what Donald Trump, the 45th president, Republican nominee, said last night at a rally in Michigan.
But can you imagine President Xi, Putin, all of them? They're all smart, tough. They love their country, or they want to do well with their country, whatever it is, all ideology. But we have to have somebody that can protect us. And Orban was right. We have to have somebody that can protect us.
Orban, as he said, is Orban, the Hungarian prime minister, a problematic NATO ally who's, according to Mitch McConnell, in bed with China, Russia, and Iran. What does that description of adversaries indicate to you?
Well, Trump sort of, the people that we think of as our adversaries, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, those are the people that Trump seems to feel most warmly toward. It's our allies that he is toughest on. And it always surprises me when people say that Donald Trump is tough, because in his record, both as president, but also in the way he talks about the future, it's clear that he intends to accommodate Vladimir Putin. He just recently made very disparaging comments about Taiwan, which send a clear signal to Xi Jinping about whether we might defend Taiwan or not. And so his basic approach to the truly tough guys in the world is that he backs down, is in retreat. And his choice of JD Vance as his vice president sends a very strong signal about how we're going to treat allies and how we're going to treat adversaries. Vance voted not only against Ukraine aid, but against Taiwan aid and also against Israel aid. And I think that is the real foreign policy that Donald Trump speaks for now.
And Fiona, you served under Donald Trump on his Russia policy. You saw how he reacts to Vladimir Putin and authoritarians. Why should Americans take pause when they hear that? Why does it matter?
Well, there's two aspects of this. One is the one that Bob has already mentioned, which is Trump has an affinity with strongmen. It's how they project themselves on the world stage. It's how he wants to be seen himself. It's got nothing to do with the politics of China or Russia or the history and the policies around those relationships. It's more about how he sees himself reflected in those particular leaders and how they react to him. And then the second part is when it comes to allies, which Bob's already mentioned as well. Trump doesn't believe in allies. I mean, in part, that's the cutthroat nature of his own business and his business world. He sees allies really as supplicants, as people who want something from him. And he always makes it very clear he doesn't want to give anybody anything unless it's in his interest. There's a very transactional view. And so why that should give Americans pause is that's completely antithetical to the way that we've approached foreign affairs, in fact, domestic affairs, for a very long period, going back to the beginning of the Cold War. He's doing a major rupture in the way that America's positioned itself, both domestically and externally, in terms of its outward posture. I mean, as Bob often, says as well, people will figure out how to deal with this, but it doesn't make this any kind of an easier shift. This is a dramatic shift in the way that America thinks about the world.
Especially, if I may say, from Ronald Reagan, who was famous for his really close relationships with our Democratic allies, but also with allies. Right. He was very close to Margaret Thatcher. He was very close to Germany's Kohl, very close to France's Mitterrand, very close to Japan's Nakasone. And that was the bedrock of his foreign policy. And with those alliances and the strength that they created and the military buildup that he led, that was how we got a peaceful end to the Cold War. Whereas now with Trump and JD Vance, you basically have the opposite of that approach. We're negative toward our allies and supplicant toward our adversaries.
Fiona, I was out in Milwaukee, and it was very striking to see some of the imagery at the RNC. The man who introduced Donald Trump was the head of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. He walked on himself to it's a man's world. And the walk-on going down the hallway was like he was going out to a fight. Hulk Hogan spoke. The crowd was being led in chants, fight, 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 replicating what happened with the attempted assassination. And that slogan we were showing there on the wall, they're not after me, they're after you, I'm just standing in the way. What image does all of this project to the rest of the world?
Well, it projects to the rest of the world that the United States, frankly, right now is no different from any other country where you're getting a populist leader emerging. We've seen, this happening in France. We had the French had a near miss with the National Rally, a very long-standing populist, also isolationist party that nearly came to the fore in the snap elections. You've seen kind of populist parties emerging in the European Union parliamentary elections. They're on the rise in Germany. We've seen Brazil, in Argentina, there's a populist leader, of slightly different bent, of course. Mexico, you can look around the world and see this same phenomenon. And, as you said, look at it as a foreign country. We would be putting the United States in that kind of, not the pantheon of the greats at the moment, but the pantheon of the populist countries. We'd be saying, well, what's the difference with Hungary? What's the difference with Bolivia? What's the difference with Brazil in, the past with Bolsonaro? We would be very hard-pressed to see what the difference is. And that's what the rest of the world is looking at. They're looking at America being taken over by populist politics and also a minority, a very vociferous, vocal minority that is pushing, particular viewpoints on what's frankly the majority of the rest of the citizens.
It's also striking to me how in all those examples you just laid out, migration issues was such a trigger point for galvanizing populist opinion.
But it plays out very differently in each country.
Yeah.
Right? Here there's this whole idea, which of course is what JD Vance and many others have talked about in the convention, that democracy is going to end because migrants are coming in and it's going to change, somehow the whole perception of the politics. We actually have a great demand for migrant labour in the United States. Our growth has been dependent on that. All of the, basically economic data shows that. In other countries where there has been less economic growth, there's still, a downturn as a result of the economic crisis, from a decade ago or from COVID. There's more of a concern for competition for scarce resources and scarce jobs. There's not this idea of replacement of the population in the same way that there is here. Immigration is, of course, an international crisis. But there's a very different way it's manifesting itself in politics in different places.
Bob, you had an op-ed in November saying if Trump wins, he'll be the most powerful president to ever hold that office. And you warned the country's drifting towards dictatorship. In response, JD Vance came out with a pretty sharp letter to the Attorney General and the Secretary of State about you, saying, I suspect that they might characterize this article as an invitation to insurrection, conspiracy, attempt to bring about civil war, and he even suggested your spouse's security clearance should be reviewed. What do you think that reveals about the man seeking to be vice president?
Well, it's a preview of coming attractions. Obviously, they don't like people writing critical articles about them, but their answer to people writing critical articles about them is that they should be investigated by the Justice Department. And I think
that sounds like weaponizing the justice system.
Well, it certainly sounds like weaponizing the Justice Department, but more than that, it sounds like the end of free speech in our country. And I think it's really important to focus on something that JD Vance said in his acceptance speech. He said America is not a creedal country. I think a lot of people didn't really know what he was talking about. Mm-hmm. But what he is talking about, the creed of the United States is the Declaration of Independence and the principles therein, that everyone is equal, that everyone enjoys individual rights that were granted not by God but by government, but by the nature of being human. And that is what JD Vance is saying we should not be. And the people that he is influenced by, the intellectuals he's influenced by, are explicit about saying the Declaration of Independence, which Abraham Lincoln said was the essence of America, should not be what America's about. What should it be about? It should be about where you were born, what your ethnic group is, and it's a very nice way of saying white Christian nationalism. And that is what JD Vance is talking about. And so the problem is not just immigrants, it's everybody who's not a white Christian.
Well, he would say his spouse, is the daughter of immigrants, which he celebrated during his speech.
Right, but in that world, in a world where we're talking about an ethno-religious definition of America rather than a creedal ideas definition of America, sure, she can be in America, but she's not a real American. And that's something that Hulk Hogan, because the philosopher Hulk Hogan said only the people who support Trump are real Americans. And I think there's a long tradition. By the way, what Vance is offering is not new. It's old. It's the oldest game. It's been in both parties. It is hostility to the fundamental principles that the founders established at the beginning of this country, which is about human equality.
And when you say not new, you're talking about 1920s, 1930s, 1940s.
That's right, and the 19th century as well, both before the Civil War and after the Civil War, when many white Americans did not want to see blacks and other minorities and immigrants have equal rights.
Thank you for your analysis, both of you.